out. Everybody is emerging out with new techniques, new technologies, new skills, and one of them is the organization of international conference. Many of my colleagues were asking why we are organizing international conference only for 2 hours, only for one day. Otherwise, when it was offline, we will be holding it for 3 days and 4 days and having 10 or 12 or 15 sessions. But here only 3 sessions are there, and it is only for 2 hours because everything we can manage online, but the tea and the lunch or lunch break or tea break will continue and will finish. There are 3 sessions as mentioned in the schedule. So first and foremost, I welcome all honorable guests, the chief speaker and the keynote address by Dr. Elham Hussain from Dhaka. He is from Bangladesh, and session 2 will be by Dr. Astha Pratap from Bijnor, Uttar Pradesh. Third session will be by Dr. S.K. Sagir Ali from West Bengal. And after that, we will have complimentary close. Before complimentary close, we will have a question answer sessions. Even if after every session, if one wants to ask question, he can raise hand and then unmute the mic and go on. We will have 5 or 10 minutes only for the question answer session after every session. So diaspora literature, as everybody know, is a new faculty. The people who are migrated to another countries voluntarily or involuntarily, most of the times they are to migrate and they get settled in other country, other places of the globe, and then they cannot get free from their attachment to their motherland. And the varied experiences, the new experience they have in other land, they do express in their literature. Whatever impressions of the new people, whatever impressions of the new land they have, they try to put it in on paper. The impressions thus expressed in diaspora literature. India has the maximum number of diaspora all over the world. It is as good as 2 crore Indians are there in the, I can say, with many countries, especially United States of America and other countries. I myself had completed my PhD on Booker Prize winning novels, The Midnight Children by Salman Rushdie, and the V.S. Naipaul and Shashi Tharoor, and many others are there. Experts are there to talk on the topic. So I am here just to introduce them. Let me introduce our chief guest, the chief speaker. Admit, please. Dr. Enham Hussain, I suppose he is there online. Honorable Dr. Enham Hussain is there. He is the chief speaker of this international conference on diaspora literature. Honorable Dr. Elham Hussain is Bangladeshi academic, essayist, translator, editor, and literary critic. He has as good as 22 years teaching experience. He has done his BA in honors and masters in English literature. He has received MPhil on colonial literature and PhD on Chinua Achebe's novels from the University of Dhaka. He writes both in Bangla and English. He has authored 7 books. And Dr. Hussain has translated a handful of short stories, essays, interviews, and speeches of Indian, African, Afro-American, and Caribbean authors. More than 30 of his research articles have been published in the acclaimed academic journals of home and abroad. A huge number of his essays on literary criticism appear in journals, periodicals, and academic magazines of home and abroad. He presents research papers and delivers lectures there as a resource person. His field of interest concentrates on South Asian African literature and culture, anthropology, philosophy, and post-colonial studies. He is one of the founding members of Center of Studies in African Literature and Cultures, Dhaka, and co-edits the periodicals Africa Allo, published from it regularly. He has teaching experience in Rajasthan University of Science and Technology and National University, Bangladesh. At present, he is working as Associate Professor of English in Dhaka City College, Dhaka from Bangladesh, and having about 20 years of teaching experience to the students of graduation and post-graduation level under National University, Bangladesh. I am very happy to join him. I am very happy to introduce him, and I request Honorable Hussain sir to deliver a lecture, to guide us, to have your scholarly talk on the diaspora literature. As a keynote address and chief speaker of the session 1, I request Honorable Dr. Alan Hussain to continue.
Good morning, everybody.
Good morning, sir. Please
Sir,
continue.
thank you very much for your generous introduction. And I feel really privileged and honored to be with you, all these distinguished and acclaimed scholars, professors, researchers, and enthusiastic students. And I like to thank Honorable President of this arrangement, Honorable Secretary, Shri Atul Kumar Meher sir, Reverend Principal sir, Dr. A sir Nimbore sir, Honorable Head of the Department of English, Dr. Abhay Shinde sir, and distinguished coordinator, and two other research persons, Dr. Astha Pratap ji and Dr. Sagir Ali sir. So today I like to share some of my views with you. It is really my privilege and honor. And I like to talk on how diaspora literature functions for the formation of identity through translation, which is a metaphorical term for hybridization, mimicry, and displacement. Actually, diaspora in post-colonial situation has become a widely and critically discussed term, and mostly refers to the group of people who have left their countries for other countries and settled there. Then the connotation of this term encompasses even the group of people belonging to the members of the colonizers, left their country and went to other countries to rule them. They produced their literature and narratives, but their narratives function as a tool of exercising their hegemony. On the other hand, the narratives that the natives of different countries which were colonies, and while these people went to different countries and settled there, and they were marginalized, and they were suffering from nostalgia and desire for an attachment with the heritage of their culture and tradition of the homeland.
Excuse me,
Then,
sir.
yes, sir.
I'm
Sir.
sorry to disturb you, but will
Sir.
you please put your camera on? You're not visible. You're audible, but not visible. Please put your camera on.
So, yes.
We could listen to you very
Yes,
clearly.
So I'm trying, sir. So just excuse me for 1 minute.
Okay, sir.
I'm trying to settle the problem.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Thank you, sir.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. Now you are visible. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir.
Please continue. Please continue.
Actually, I am really sorry for technical inconvenience.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Go on.
Okay. So the literature of the diaspora who were marginalized in different countries where they settled became a source of a field, a site that presents their identity. And this literature of the diaspora living in different countries in the margin of the society has become a right-back literature, because the literature which was produced by the colonial diaspora, especially the colonizers' literature, distorted the identity of the natives. So the diaspora literature is a kind of counter discourse. That is, this writing challenges the writings of the colonial diaspora, in which the image of the natives is distorted. Now, I like to show how far is it capable of producing a seminal counter discourse and defining the identity of the diaspora. Actually, I have tried to investigate this issue in my talk today, and I have borrowed the theoretical framework from Homike Bhabha, Gayatri Spivak, and some other seminal post-colonial theorists and critics. So now I like to read from my paper. The title of my paper is The Role of Diaspora Literature in Making an Identity. And while discussing this particular topic, I have given examples. I will give you examples from Bangladeshi diaspora literature. And I will also throw some light on some Indian diaspora writers. Some of my very, very favorite authors, for example, Amitabh Ghosh, Rohinton Mistry, Jhumpa Lahiri. And I am very much interested in the writings of these seminal writers. So I am reciting from my paper. At the very outset of his essay, Imaginary Homelands. This essay also occurs in this book, Imaginary Homelands. Salman Rushdie refers to the first sentence of The Go-Between, a novel by L.P. Hartley, that reads, "The past is a foreign country," and with an attempt to invert this idea, he visited his home city, Bombay, after almost half of his life he spent in England. And to his utter dismay, he discovered that the India that he left lived in his imagination. In his words, I am quoting from his essay, "It may be that the writers in my position, exiles or immigrants or expatriates, are haunted by some sense of loss, some urge to reclaim, to look back, even at the risk of being mutated into pillars of salt. But if we do look back, we must also do so in the knowledge which gives rise to profound uncertainties, that our physical alienation from India almost inevitably means that we will not be capable of reclaiming precisely the thing that was lost. that we will, in short, create fictions, not actual cities or villages, but invisible ones, imaginary homelands, Indias of the mind. So I have quoted from the essay of Salman Rushdie, one of my favorite writers. The space and time in which a diasporic writer seeks to project his or her country do not allow him or her to obtain honor without raising suspicion, because, borrowing the idea from the above mentioned essay, I affirm that he or she deals in the broken mirrors of his or her memories, many of quote unquote, whose fragments have been irretrievably lost. Besides, the adherence which is torn between the homeland and the host country gives birth to ambivalence, anxiety, and historical myopia, which challenge the radicality of identity of the diaspora writers. Diaspora, though a millennium-old phenomenon, is theorized only in the post-colonial period. 3,000 years ago, the Aryans came to the subcontinent and settled here as diaspora. The diaspora of the Jewish people is mentioned even in the Bible. But colonialism over the last 500 years resulted in a voluntary or forced movement of the colonizers and the colonized alike. So diaspora occurred on both the parts, on the part of the colonizers and on the part of the colonized. But the diaspora literature of the colonizers is associated with hegemony. It is used as a tool to exercise hegemony upon the natives. In the case of the colonizers, it is mostly imbibed with the euphoria of discoveries of new lands, with a view to making capital and maximizing profit. To speed up this enterprise and invigorate the project of accumulating wealth, they went on with the mission of otherizing or marginalizing the indigenous people, their cultures, languages, and historical realities. But in the case of the colonized, the dispersal or movement has been traumatic. The natives were taken away to foreign countries as slaves, that we find with the case of Africa, and indentured laborers that we find mostly with the subcontinent. So being detached from their home, they felt a persistent oppression of nostalgia that provoked them to make a search of their identity. But, quote, with the challenge of essentialist corruptions of identity and culture in the late 20th century, diasporic studies have assumed a central importance in cultural debates and in the increasingly transnational world brought about by globalization. The diasporic subject has come to be regarded as a representative protagonist rather than marginalized exile, unquote. The process of diaspora in the present globalized world is diffused and involves various factors. Development of technologies, internet, and different social media have made the issue of identity a very complicated term, marked for its intertextuality and intersectionality. Migratory patterns today are now determined in some cases by consensus and in some other cases by coercion. Domestic migration also impacts the culture and behavior of the migrants. At present, initial circumstances are not emphasized more, rather heterogeneity of nationalities and the cultures is contributing to the ever-increasing multiplicity of identities. Homi K. Bhabha addresses this issue of the forms, quote unquote, forms of cultural intersection, engagement, and transformation that occur in the in and across diasporic communities, and the process of disposal and dissemination is structuring their interrelationship, unquote. Bhabha's nation and narration and the location of culture address, quote, cultural hybridization and a wider organization featuring of contemporary cultures, while insisting upon the fact that all cultures is a product of historical processes of conflict as consent, coercion as choice, unquote. This process of interaction, intersection, and intertextuality goes on across the borders of cultures unendingly, with its disruptive potential that places the diasporic people in the space of in-betweenness, cultural ambivalence, and anxiety as they feel the sense of belonging and dislocation at the same time. In the postmodern realities, while technology explodes all around, the process of identity building has become here problematic and inconspicuous because this process is being always constituted within. Besides, the malleability and permeability of culture brings about intersectionality or intertextuality among the cultures and consequently gives birth to a universalized vision of cultural hybridity. Monica Ali, a Bangladeshi diaspora author living in London, has addressed the question of cultural hybridity in her seminal novel, Brick Lane. Regarding her engagement with cultural hybridity, Julie Mulani, a post-colonial critic, has asserted, I'm quoting from her, Monica Ali's exploration of different ways in which members of diasporic communities position themselves in relation to home, place, and tradition illustrate how cultures might strategically resist the potential dissolution or reframing of cultural norms posed by processes of hybridization, precisely in order to maintain keenly felt attachment to place and culture, unquote. So Monica Ali brings forth the power of diasporas in perpetuating highly regulated forms of tradition and culture, as well as fostering new forms of cultural engagement and exchange. Stuart Hall, Homi K. Bhabha, and Paul Gilroy emphasize the same issue, that hybridization appears to be a continuing process of transformation and exchange, recognizing relations of power and affiliating and valuing differences. So, diaspora opens up the path of creolization of culture, but it does not pose a threat to the existence of inherited culture of the diasporic people because they are always chased by two impulses, desire and nostalgia. And this is the reason for which a bond or affinity assumes its strong formation among the people in the diasporic community, which may provide them with an impetus to develop political consciousness and engagements in the host country. Again, the consciousness of racial hatred, fragmentation, and dislocation may conspicuously lead them off track, and it is very glaring in Bangladesh. Bihari diaspora in Bangladesh can be a very relevant case study in this connection. A huge number of Indian Muslims migrated to the east wing of Pakistan, now Bangladesh, in 1947. During the Liberation War in 1971, they supported the west wing of Pakistan. After the liberty of Bangladesh, they went into several refugee camps. Even after 50 years of independence, the Bihari diaspora cannot produce their own narrative or literature. They're using a pidgin language here produced out of the intermingling between Urdu and Bangla. And the cross currents of culture have brought them too close to the natives of Bangladesh. And even in 2008, Dhaka High Court gave them right to citizenship. They cannot produce their discourse and put it into the mainstream of literature of Bangladesh because of their looking back to their home country with desire and nostalgia. So creolization of culture and tradition and diverse patterns of migration promotes the formation of identity whose liquidity opens up the way of intertextuality and cross-currents. But is it a happy juxtaposition of two different cultures converging in the point which in the language of Homi Bhabha, third space? The answer to this question requires a conspicuous comprehension of the relationship between two binary oppositions, center and margin. Center stands for the group of people who have political autonomy. On the other hand, the margin in Gramsci's term, subaltern, lack autonomous political power. The diaspora of the first generation, irrespective of Indian diaspora and African diaspora, who were mostly slaves or indentured laborers, was totally kept out of the center of the hegemony. No political consensus was settled between these two binaries on the dominance, not hegemony. In Ranajit Guha's term, Ranajit Guha's famous book, Dominance Without Hegemony, I have used this term from that very book, was exercised upon the first generation of these diaspora. But the process of identity formation found a burgeoning of consciousness from among the second generations, who were Europeans or Americans or Mauritanians or Caribbeans or Trinidadians or Indian and African descents. By this time, the migrant communities showed rigorous ability for diaspora integration with the host cultures and societies. Because though initially these diasporas had to confront with a huge number of constraints, gradually they overcame many of them and developed complicity or engagement with the entrepreneurial and financial activities and also political thoroughfares. Moreover, many of them, through religious conversion, surrendered their ideological loyalty to the normative life of the host countries. Above all, internal integration among the diverse communities of diaspora, which was geared up by their consciousness of cultural heritage of their homeland that they left behind, helped them bring about a nexus between them and their host cultures. In such a situation, they form a multi-locational self. But the construction of multi-locational self creates ambivalence as it involves the recreation of an identity, drawing from both home and host lands, and is not marked by strict boundaries. Power that generates this type of identity is known as host land versus homeland dynamics. By virtue of these dynamics, when a number of diaspora comes back to his homeland, after many years of his settlement in the host country, he conspicuously feels himself to be in an alien land among the broken images of his memories. This kind of feeling, generated from the rotation of dislocation, has been termed by Simha Karhoff, a post-colonial critic, as double diasporization. Homeland consciousness is challenged by the experience after his return from the host country. So homeland, in fact, exists in the imagination, not reality. Oh, really sorry for technical inconvenience. Most probably I was disconnected for a few seconds. Okay, now I am going back to my paper again. That is spatial and locates the site in which the diaspora writers produce their narratives and discourses. The subaltern begin to speak, but who will listen to them is more important than that we hear from the question of Gayatri Chakraborty's paper. Can the subaltern speak? Yes, subaltern speak. Now, who will listen to them is more important, and what they will write about. The diasporic writers write about their homeland that they or their forefathers left behind in 30s of 19th century, or in the first few decades of the 20th century, or in 60s and 70s of 20th century. It is true that literary writing is mostly personal because it reflects his or her own point of view and attitude. In this connection, as the diasporic authors hold the consciousness of their cultural heritage, they're mostly autoethnographic, basically because of the subject matter. Social, political, and ethnographical contexts that they experience keenly basically find asylum in the canvas of their narrative. It so happens as the diasporic writers feel a persistent urge to express their attachment with their native land on the basis of their nostalgia and desire for home that they know well, that it is now a far away country to them. At present, many Indian, African, and Bangladeshi diaspora writers are producing narratives reflecting their homelands. A huge number of Indian diasporic writers like Amitabh Ghosh, Rohinton Mistry, Jhumpa Lahiri, Salman Rushdie, Shashi Tharoor, Bikram Sheth, and many other distinguished Indian diasporic writers are producing very seminal narratives. African authors such as Ngugi wa Thiong'o, Ben Okri, Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie, and some others are producing narratives that challenge the Eurocentric African discourse. And Bangladeshi diaspora authors Monica Ali, Tahmima Anam, Jia Haidar Rahman, and a handful of authors are producing narratives about Bangladesh from their host countries. Now the question visits our mind: is the image of their homeland that they or their forefathers left authentically depicted in their narratives? To address this question, briefly, for example, I like to concentrate on Bangladeshi diasporic author Tahmima Anam. But prior to this, I think it is pertinent to refer to Robin Cohen, who claims that among the diasporic community, a disposition prevails and it idealizes the ancestral homeland. They also believe that all members of diaspora should be committed to the maintenance or restoration of the original homeland and to its safety and prosperity. But living in the in-betweenness, actually I have used this term from Homike Baba, in-betweenness space with a hybridized development of ethno-communal consciousness, home gradually slides into imagination. That Salman Rushdie has also mentioned in his Imaginary Homelands. Post-colonial critic Bra has termed home of the diasporic community as a quote-unquote mythic place of desire in the diasporic imagination, because it is translated through the process of recreation. It so happens because in the postmodern situation, when globalization is working for homogenizing the economic institutions and political ideologies of the whole world and challenging, quote, monochrome and limited identities on which nation states are built, unquote, and foregrounding multiplicity of identities in the cosmopolitan cities of heterogeneity of nationalities, Diaspora puts emphasis on the end result of migration, not on the circumstances of the origin of migration. So, dislocation from the home country, fraught with displacement of discursive attachment with inherited culture and tradition, conspicuously brings about a blurred vision, which may crucially create historical myopia in the diasporic writers, as they live far away from the first-hand experience of the realities of their home country for many years, even for several generations. It is conspicuously marked in many diasporic authors. For example, a critical reading of Tahmima Anam's A Golden Age reveals that she concentrates on the ambivalence of a woman divided between motherly affection for her children and her love for the country, which is shedding blood in a corrosive war against the west wing of Pakistan for its liberty. Rehana, the name of that widow, initially does not want to let her children, Sohail and Maya, go to the war as freedom fighters, as she is anxious about their security. So there inevitably emerges a conflict between mother and children, metaphorically self-love and patriotism, that is love for the country or motherland. But after going through a lot of happenings, she overcomes this dilemma and is convinced by her children. In her second novel of the trilogy, Tahmima Anam has very aptly depicted the dramatic transformation of Sohail, the character whom we meet in her first novel, into an extremist Muslim, a follower of Tabligh Jamaat, who shuns any kind of aesthetic enjoyment like music, songs, etc., etc. Regarding the socio-political context, Tahmima Anam has referred to the regime of General Hussain Muhammad Ershad from 1983 to 1990, which according to many was a regime of military dictatorship. Ershad officially declared Islam as the state religion. The case how politicization of religion transforms the psychological, political, social, and moral framework, and how this attempt gives birth to extremism and challenges communal harmony, which is also another cause of forced diaspora, is investigated here in this novel. Her third novel of the trilogy, The Bones of Grace, throws light on the culmination of the problems like this. Now, Anam has very powerfully depicted the problems of post-independent country that achieved freedom in 1971. She conspicuously seems to focus her eyes on 1970s and 1980s, a fragment of a long history in whose womb the germs of these problems, I will call them ailments, lie. To diagnose these germs, it requires an extensive study of the evolution of the historiography of the subcontinent. The history of the birth of Bangladesh claims a more focus on the historical evolution from 1757 to 1971, including the events of the fall of Siraj-ud-Dowlah, Sepoy Mutiny, Bankim Chandra's consciousness of Bengali nationalism, then Bengal's partition, and again Bengal's reunion, Gandhi's political movement, Jinnah's two-nation theory, partition of 1947, political and economic persecution of the West Pakistan on East Pakistan, now Bangladesh, communal violence in 1964, both in Dhaka and Calcutta, and so on. In this connection, actually, all these historical incidents are to be explored very minutely and meticulously to understand the present situation of the rise of extremism, which is cherished and nourished very often by politicization, by the process of politicization. So if we want to understand this ailment, we have to go back to our historiography. But this writer, Tamima Anam, is trying to concentrate our attention on two particular decades, or at best 3 decades of the history of Bangladesh, that is independent Bangladesh. But before independence, we had to cross the ups and downs of history, historical events and realities. But all those incidents, or all those realities, or all those phenomena of history are lapsed here. And I call it historical myopia. And this historical myopia may affect the readers also. If the readers fall into the trap of historical myopia, then it may persist them to develop a wrong perception of identity. So diaspora writing is to be very much investigating, that is very much, it should have the potential to explore the long spectrum of history. Otherwise, it may create a wrong perception of identity. And in this connection, I like to refer to another incident or another example from Amitabh Ghosh's The Shadow Lines. Amitabh Ghosh is my very favorite author. And while delivering lecture on this particular text in a conference, some of the listeners questioned me that Amitabh Ghosh has thrown sufficient light on the communal violence that took place in Dhaka in 1964. Then, but he has not thrown sufficient light on the communal violence or atrocities that took place in Calcutta simultaneously. Actually, that very audience, or that very critical reader, has, in his point of view, that Amitabh Ghosh has not depicted the whole picture of that time. So he has presented a fragmentary picture of the historical realities of 1964. So anyway, I am now towards the end of my lecture. I am concluding it, only reading a few lines from my paper. Besides, regarding the issue of language, diaspora literature requires a profound concentration for critical analysis. A general perception about diaspora literature is that it should choose English language as lingua franca. It is found with the Bangladeshi diasporic literature, as well as many other diasporic literatures. But the use of English as a lingua franca poses a threat of keeping a huge number of home country readers outside because of linguistic barrier, and in so doing, it has the risk of turning into a bulk of elitist literature. In addition, it has the risk of being marginalized in the mainstream literature of the native land. To address this issue, Kenyan diaspora author Ngugi wa Thiong'o has chosen his native language, Gikuyu, as a medium of his writing. Though to reach the international readership, he translates his own writing into English. Choosing the language of the colonizing or imperializing nation state, a diasporic writer has the risk of being transformed into a linguistic other. So diasporic writers usually encounter a dilemma because, I'm quoting from it, on the one hand, language is a part of the process of defining and expressing self and collective identity. And on the other, there is a need to reach a wider audience who are likely to favor high prestige language, unquote. So I think India has very successfully overcome this very linguistic barrier because Indian diasporic writers are writing in Indian English. This is really a matter of pride for us. But as the diasporic authors live in the in-between space of location, he has to invert his styles and idioms, pidgins that match the anticipated audience. In this way, exilic or diasporic writing is also a fertile site of language contact, facilitating the production of literature in translation and intertextuality in narratives, inscribing cultural interactions, unquote. But there is the apprehension of missing many things in translation. I think the major challenge of the diaspora writers is to overcome this apprehension of missing the authenticity of the discursive narratives. So this is all about my talk. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much, sir, for your very scholarly talk on diaspora literature, especially Bangladeshi diaspora and the Indian diaspora also. As you said, you were in touch with Amitabh Ghosh, Jampilary's literature, Robinson Mystery, V.S. Naipaul, and Salman Rushdie. Everybody knows his Midnight Children.
Yes, sir. Yes.
Not only a Man Booker Award, but the Booker of Bookers also.
Yes, yes.
That's a very good thing. And you also made a very, I could say, important comments on how the rise of extremism arises out of the political issues due to polarization of votes and other things. Yes. And that in 1971, Bangladesh got liberty, and after even 50 long years of independence, many of the writers could not produce what they actually wanted to produce. Yes. Ups and downs are there in historical events, especially Amitabh Ghosh's Shadow Lines. You made a comment that he could depict the communal violence in Dhaka, but not that in the Kolkata, maybe. So I'm here to ask the participants if anybody has to raise a question. If you have any question, there are only 5 minutes for that. First, you raise your hands, then unmute your mic, and then we'll go. Otherwise, we are there for the second session. Sarika Julie is there. I request her to unmute her mic and ask her question. Sarika Julie, please ask your question. Am I audible? Sarika Julie, please raise. If there are questions, raise your hand. Otherwise, we are there for the...
No question, sir. No question.
Okay. If there are no questions, once again, I am here to express my very sincere gratitude to Honorable Dr. Hussain, sir. And now I request my colleague, Professor Bankar, to introduce the guest of the section 2, Honorable Dr. Astha Pratap.
I'm seeing a question constantly being asked by Adhira Shri, and even I would like to hear the answer from sir. Sir, if you could kindly take that question from Adhira Shri. She's been putting it in the chat box, sir.
Good morning, all. Here we have the very
I don't
kindly
answer does not.
I request all the participants to mute yourself. Here I am going to introduce our next session resource person, Dr. Ashta Pratap. She is working as assistant professor in English department, RBD, Mahila Mahavidyalaya, Bijnor. She is well qualified. She has done MA, MPhil. She has also qualified UGC NET examination, and she has already pursued PhD degree. Topic of the PhD or the poetry of Dylan Thomas, poet of Wales and other cultures at CCS University campus, Meerut. She has completed his MPhil in verbal imagery and celebration of natural beauty in poetry of Dylan Thomas at CCS University campus, Meerut. She has published so many journals, near about 7 research papers also she has been published in journals. Here are some: isolation and alienation in the poetry of Philip Larkin, symbolism in the poetry of Philip Larkin, poetic imagery in the poetry of Dylan Thomas, then colonialism and its legacy, it's a study of suburbanites by Amitav Ghosh, the portrayal of suffering of socially denigrated, suppressed, and silenced class in Indian fiction. And the last journal paper was presented here, social injustice in the plays of Galsworthy. She has presented so many various papers in national and international seminars and conferences also. I request here Dr. Ashta Pratap to start the session. Dr. Ashta Pratap ma'am. Kindly put on your mic and camera and please start the session. I request all the participants kindly mute yourself. Dr. Ashta Pratap ma'am.
Yes, sir, I'm here.
Yes, please.
Am I audible, sir?
Yes, ma'am, you are audible.
I'm audible, sir?
Yes, you are audible, ma'am. Kindly put
Hello?
on your camera, ma'am.
I'm audible, sir?
Yes, you are audible. Yes, you are visible and audible also.
Okay, sir. Yeah.
Yes, ma'am.
You're
Please,
audible,
please.
sir. Actually, there was a technical issue before this.
All right, ma'am. No problem.
Moment. Yeah. A very good morning to one and all present here. Very good morning to the key speaker, Dr. Hussain, and Dr. Sagar Ali, and to the organizing team. First of all, I would like to thank you all for giving me this opportunity to speak here before you people and to express my views on this topic, diaspora literature. So as I'm going to talk about the cultural identity crisis, before that, I would like to throw some light on diaspora literature. We all know that what is diaspora literature, but still I would like to talk about it in brief. So if we talk about the word diaspora, this word has been, we all know that it has been taken from Greek word, which actually means disperse, or you can say scattering. So that simply means when we talk about diaspora literature, it is a kind of dispersion of the people. This diaspora is a dispersion of the people from their homeland. Or you can say it's a displacement of a community or a culture into different culture or a geographical region. Now, diasporic literature is the literature which is produced by the diasporic writers. And if we talk about Indian diasporic literature, we are familiar with the many names. Like, we are having many major contributors in Indian diasporic literature, like Salman Rushdie, V.S. Naipaul, and other English writers like Anita Desai, Kiran Desai, Amitav Ghosh, Jhumpa Lahiri, and many more. So if we talk about the diasporic literature, it's a literature which is actually produced by the people, by the authors who have moved, who have shifted from their native place. And this migration or this moving can be voluntary or it can be forced one. So what actually matters is here how these writers who are diasporic writers, how these writers represent their native culture or their native land into their writings. This is the most important thing when we talk about diasporic literature. So here, when we talk about diasporic literature, there are various themes, and we all are familiar of such themes. Like the first one is displacement, then your nostalgia, then migration, and your cultural identity crisis, even your colonial legacy and multiculturalism. Several other themes are there. So primarily, I'm going to talk about cultural identity crisis, which is actually a kind of displacement of culture. As I have mentioned earlier also, diaspora is a displacement of a place, but this displacement occurs not only in the matter of land, it occurs even in the culture also. So if we talk about the Indian writers, they talked about this displacement of culture. Like I would like to, first of all, I would like to give you the example of Salman Rushdie's Midnight Children. That came in 1981. In this work, he clearly shows how cultures, they are overlapping with each other. Through the character of Salim Sinai, he tried to portray a journey of self-realization, or you can say self-discovery. And, it clearly shows the theme of displacement, that is not only the displacement of land, that is the displacements of culture also. It shows how the immigrants are forced to accept the cultural displacement because, they are not able to remove the very impact of their native land, from, or you can say the very memories of their native land, and they are forced to accept the new cultural identity. So this is something, the displacement of culture. Now, when we talk about, the memories of the past or memories of the native land, it is actually, nostalgia. So this is also one of the dominant theme of diasporic literature. And nostalgia, basically, you can say that longing for past. And this is actually everywhere in diasporic literature. Nostalgia, when we talk about this longing, this desire of, to coming back to home, or a desire to get back to their native land, it actually intensifies when we get to know that it's not possible to get back to that place where we are belonging to. And actually, even if they try hard to get back to that identity, to get back to that place, that land, even also, they are not able to get back that place. So this is something, a kind of longing, eternal longing, a long-lasting longing, or you can say desire. And to some extent, we can say that the homeland, which is actually another, you can say the loss of homeland or a desire of homeland. It is also a theme of diaspora literature. In this diasporic literature, home becomes, somewhere it turns into a mythical thing, which is not possible to get in their life. So when we talk about, nostalgia, we can have the example of Rohinton Mistry and his works like Such a Long Journey. In many other works, he talked about this nostalgia in detail. That is quite visible there. Now, as I have to talk about the cultural identity crisis, before that, I would like to talk about what is this cultural identity. The cultural identity is actually a belonging, okay, a belonging to a group of your self-conception, your self-perception, your self-realization, that is somewhere related to you through your nationality, religion, social class, locality, and etc. So this is your cultural identity. And when we talk about the cultural identity crisis, when we are talking about the diasporic literature, we find a threat for cultural identity. It is everywhere. I mean, the loss of cultural identity, this is one of the dominant themes of diasporic literature, and that is quite visible in the works of diasporic writers. Like, first of all, I would like to quote the example of the inheritance of loss. The inheritance of loss, which is written by Kiran Desai, and that is a Man Booker Prize winning novel. In that particular novel, she talks about the various experiences of immigrants. At the same time, she talks about this loss of cultural identity, or you can say cultural identity crisis. And here I would like to present it through the character of Jemubhai. Jemubhai, who is a judge in the novel, and he got married at the age of 14 years with a lady named Nimmi, so that he could get the dowry and go back to Cambridge for his higher studies. So he went to Cambridge for to pursue his higher studies, and he was there for 5 years. What he noticed there, what he actually faced there, is that he was not accepted there. He was ill-treated there. People misbehaved with him, and he find himself alienated. And this torture, this alienation, it increased to the height. And what happened with Jemubhai, that he started feeling an inferiority complex. And to overcome this inferiority complex, he just started imitating the people of, England. He started imitating the people. He started, following them. He started to living like them, to act like them, to behave like them, to dress like them. And initially, during this process, he lost his own identity, his own cultural identity. And he even goes to that extent that he used to apply fairness creams to get that fairer tone like them. So this is something, showing that how he lost his cultural identity. And when he came back to India, he finds that he's misfit here. He finds his wife, she is also misfit according to him, and ultimately, he left her. And this is something, throughout his life, when we go through the portrayal of Jemubhai, we find him that he always wears socks. So the very impact of that Western culture that was long lasting, and he turned into an Anglophile, and he lost his own cultural values. He just acted like an Anglophile. He just behaved like them. He just think like them. He just wanted to be like them. But in reality, neither he belonged here nor he belonged to there. He's just hanging between the two cultures. He lost his own culture. He was not accepted there, and he was not ready to accept the people of India. So this is quite clear how he lost his cultural identity, and it happens with most of the people who have migrated from India to America or other lands. You can say that. Another example I would like to quote from Jhumpal Lahiri's The Namesake. In that particular novel, this is basically a story of Ashok and Ashmita, a Bengali couple who settled in America. So they are having a son whose name is Gogol Ganguly. Now, this child, whose name is Gogol Ganguly, basically this is a pet name. But when we try to analyze, when we go through the novel, we just came to know that, how, he feel ashamed of that pet name, Gogol. He never tried to get the real meaning of that name. Why he get this name? The very idea or the very thought behind this name was that his father, he get a rebirth, kind of rebirth, because he survived from an accident, and that's why he gave this name to his son. Though this is a Russian name, but Gogol, he was never able to understand why he got such a strange name, and he started feeling ashamed of his native qualities. He started hating his own culture, that was a Bengali culture. So this is something he wanted to escape from his roots, and in this process he adopted his another name, that is Nikhil. Though he adopted the name, but throughout his life he was craving for identity, which he actually has. He didn't have any particular identity. Neither he was Bengali nor he was American. He was just hanging. Again, he was hanging between, again he was dealing, again he was trying to get an identity. So this is something, the displacement of culture. Neither he was belonging to here, nor he was belonging to there. So this is another example of displacement of culture. And I would like to quote another example of the shadow lines written by Amitav Ghosh. There also, the work is based on partition and communal rights of Dhaka. In that particular work also, we find this cultural identity crisis, and that is clearly visible in the case of Ila Datta Chaudhary. Ila, who was brought up in different countries, because his father, he usually get transferred from this place to that place, and that's why Ila get impacted. She was that impacted that she is having a shifting identity. She feels that she is having no home. She wanted to stay in London. Why? Because London is a place where she can get freedom, where she can live freely, and she really don't like India because here she finds restrictions and so many customs and traditions, and she really don't want to bound herself here. So she's craving for something, but that something is far away from her reach. And initially in this process, in this search of identity, she'd get married to Nick Price. Later, she realized this was a futile decision because she was actually, she actually lost her cultural identity. Neither she was American, neither she was a Britisher, nor she was Indian. So there, in her character also, we find a cultural identity crisis. And how it happened? When we failed to understand our culture, when we started feeling inferior for our culture, when we started feeling ashamed of our own native cultures, values, and traditions, and we started imitating others. It happens at that moment. It happened with Ella, it happened with the Goggle, same thing happened with Jemubhai. They all are belonging to nowhere. They all are hanging between the two cultures. Neither they are belonging to this world, nor they are belonging to that world. So this cultural identity crisis is quite visible in most of the diasporic works. And if we talk about this cultural identity crisis, this is something, just to overcome this crisis, we need to realize, we need a self-realization. We need to get to know the roots of our culture. We need to understand our nativeness. We need to understand our Indianness. We need to understand our beliefs, our customs, our traditions, and we need to accept everything. Doesn't matter, be it our superstitions, be it our beliefs, be it whatever it is, we need to accept it. So this cultural identity crisis is quite visible in almost all the diasporic literature. That's all I wanted to say, and I would like to end here. And thank you so much, sir, for giving me this opportunity to express my ideas here. Thank you. Hello.
Good evening, ma'am. Thank you very much for your very scholarly.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Your given expressions and your very live presentation and very scholarly comment on the presentations and on especially diaspora literature, especially Indian diaspora. That Shadow Lines by Amitav Ghosh and your topic, cultural identity crisis in Indian literature, and how the protagonist of the novel, they find England be a free country, but India, they find there are many restrictions there. There are some, I think, questions by the participants. I could see some of them are there to ask you a few questions.
Yes, sir.
Let me read. And if anybody wanted to raise question, please raise your hand and then unmute your mic. There is a Sangeeta Jayaraman who says that it's a deep explanation in easy language. There are compliments for you. Dr. Priyanka says you are to the point, madam. And Jasmine Varghese also said for your wonderful presentation. There are comments and compliments.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much.
Midway, somebody said that your voice was not audible, but now we people find it very live, very interesting, and your body language was also very express actual your feelings.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, sir.
And if there are no questions, I couldn't see in the message box any question as such. All of them are compliments. And,
Hello, sir. Hello, sir. There is a question in the chat box from Vikas Kumar. Please.
Vikas Kumar. Just a minute. Huh? Chat box में Vikas Kumar है. We are looking for it. Are NRIs part of Indian diaspora? Is a question by Vikas Kumar. NRIs are part of diaspora or not? Honorable Dr. Asta Madam.
To some extent, they are also part of this diaspora, because they are also from this land. And if we talk about someone who is belonging here, someone who is nostalgic, NRIs also, or they are also nostalgic. They are also from this native land. They are also having that culture, that the traditional values in their minds. Though things change, things may change later, but still, they are also, if they are talking about their country, if they are talking about the Indianness, if they are talking about the initial values of Indian culture, then they are definitely the part of this diasporic literature, if they are talking about it. And initially, if we talk about it on a general scale, yeah, they are also part of it. But if they are not, expressing their views or experiences regarding it, then we can't put them into that category. But they are actually a part.
Very true, very true. All NRIs, they don't, many times they don't write, they don't express.
Exactly.
And they couldn't many times feel the difference between their homeland and the host country.
Until and unless we don't get any kind of views or any kind of comments or compliments from them, then we can't say that whether they are coming into this category or not.
Yes, yes. If they find homely at the foreign country also.
Exactly, exactly, sir. They need to share their experience first, and only then.
We want to say that otherwise we won't call them diaspora.
No.
Unless and until they write something.
Exactly.
Okay.
They are diasporic figures. They are diasporic, but not coming into the category of diasporic literature.
Yeah. They are diaspora, but not coming in that category
yes,
of diaspora.
Yes.
Any other? If there is no question.
Hello, sir. Yeah. I have a question.
Yes, please ask. Please continue.
Ma'am, Bertolt Brecht alienation effect is related to the theme of the diaspora literature.
Which one, ma'am? Alienation.
Yeah, alienation effect.
Yes, ma'am. Absolutely. Alienation is, it is quite related.
And it is the term is coined by the Bertolt Brecht, and is it related to diaspora literature?
Alienation is actually related to diaspora, because whenever we felt, whenever we started feeling kind of inferiority, when we started feeling inferiority complex, we find ourselves alienated into a strange world. And this alienation, it some ways, makes us, it actually, lead us to away from everything, even you can say to our own culture. Alienation is a very, 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 very much part of this diaspora literature. This is quite correlated with this literature, as the nostalgia is related. In the same way, alienation is also related to this, literature.
Okay,
thank you, ma'am.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Okay, sir.
She said, as nostalgia is related, alienation also too is related to that.
Exactly, sir.
Now this is time for me to go to session 3.
Yes, sir. Sure.
And I request my colleague to introduce the resource person for session 3. SK Dr. Sakir.
Good morning once again. I request Dhanulal not to present, not to share the screen. Here, in our third session, we have a very eminent resource person. Let me give introduction. Here we have Dr. S.K. Sagar Ali sir. He is an assistant professor at the Department of English, Midnapur College, which is autonomous in West Bengal, India. He has he has written a book titled Literary Theory, and the subtitle of the his book is Textual Applications with Atlantic Publishers. And another book he has published, The Making of a Literary Theory, that is due in November 2020 with Routledge Publications, India. His research focuses upon cultural studies and European Muslim immigrations in the post-1945 period, particularly of the Britain. It also includes the relationship between post-colonialism and Orientalism, the theoretical perspectives of post-colonialism and Islam, the position of religion, violence, and human rights in British Muslim fictions. Dr. Alisa's monograph Community, Identity, and Resistance in Select British Muslim Fictions, and also he has been edited volumes entitled The Making of Literary Theory, and second one is here, which was very published recently in 2021, that is A Religion in South Asian Fictions, that are scheduled to be published from the House of Routledge. The book titled Literary Theory, Textual Applications has been published from the House of Atlantic Publication, New Delhi. Also, the Journal of Post-Colonial Writing, JPW, under the House of Taylor and Francis, has been published. One of his theses, that is Islam and Gender, Major Issues and Debates. Such a very eminent resource person we got in our third session. So here I would like to request Dr. S.K. Sagar Ali sir, kindly unmute your mic, kindly put on your camera, and please start the session. Dr. S.K. Sagar Ali sir.
Thank you very much. Thank you, principal sir, organizers, and all the professors over here. I sincerely thank you all, and all the participants over here on this virtual platform, and the resource persons, respected resource persons over here. So we have learned several things on diaspora from the resource persons from the Bangladesh, Dhaka, and he has beautifully described the different aspects of diasporic literature with examples and reflections of all things. Whereas our another resource person, Madam, she has also beautifully described the subtle nuances of diasporic literature. So, but now my turn is to put all these things in a something different manner in terms of theoretical perspective. See, I'm going to discuss about the decoloniality or the decolonial perspective in such diasporic scenarios. Okay, so see, in his article on the coloniality of being, Latin American decolonial thinker, namely Nelson Maldonado Torres, develops a framework for analyzing racial figures in modernity who have experienced what he describes as the darker sides of being. Maldonado Torres theorizes a concept of ontology for racialized peoples in modernity that shows that there are those without ontology, or as he argues, they exist as non-beings and subhuman others who dwell in zone of non-being, quote unquote, as spoken by Maldonado Torres. In his work, Maldonado Torres locates his discussion largely around the racialized experiences of Black and Indian indigenous people. His work is important to engage with as it shares motifs with the wider decolonial studies canon, while at the same time being novel in its contributions to understanding the modernity, coloniality or decoloniality discourse. Clear? So, a number of Latin American and Caribbean decolonial thinkers, namely Maldonado Torres, Gross Fugiel, Minolo, Gordon, Winter, they have contributed to the discussion on coloniality of being in relation to the Black and indigenous by emphasizing that the rise of the modern colonial world system that is fundamentally linked to the moment of 1492 CE and the 16th century, in which Europe cemented its conquest of the Americas and control over the transatlantic slave trade. While they have done substantial archival work in revealing the depths to which Eurocentric knowledge and power have racially marked the ontologies of certain non-Europeans, the field is not without the inadequacies. So one gap in their knowledge production is how coloniality was formed in relation to the diaspora and the question of diaspora or the diaspora question. What is meant by coloniality is not to be confused with colonialism. Colonialism is the full or partial control of the sovereignty of one nation or people by another, mainly by means of economic and political conquest, exploitation, genocide or settlement. Clear? Coloniality on the other hand, refers to long-term patterns of power that emerge as a result of modern colonialism, capitalism, and slavery that define culture, labor, intersubjective relations, knowledge production, and more beyond the strict limits of colonial administration. Clear? So the coloniality is alive in books, in academic performance, in self-images of people, and in the other several aspects of our modern experience. So in a way, we breathe coloniality all the time, every day. Clear? So what I'm trying to say is that decolonial epistemology, also known as the decoloniality, questions the monopoly and universalizing tendencies of epistemologies from global north and calls for a recognition and mainstreaming of other knowledges and ways of engaging.
Excuse me, sir. Excuse me, sir. Your mic is.
Okay.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah. Sorry.
Please.
So, thank you. So the decolonial epistemology, also known as the decoloniality, questions the monopoly and the universalizing tendencies of epistemologies from the global north and calls for the recognition and the mainstreaming of other knowledges and ways of engaging with knowledges. So several critiques trace the historical origins of decolonial epistemology to human political and intellectual struggles against the dark aspects of modernity, such as mercantilism, slave trade, imperialism, colonialism, apartheid, neocolonialism, underdevelopment, neoliberalism, and globalization. All these discourses of modernity did sow the seeds of hierarchized, racialized identity categories that underpin dominant understandings of diaspora cultures and identities all over the world. Clear? What I am saying is that the underpinning of the diaspora cultures, through its unique take on power, knowledge, culture, history, human experience, and globalization, decolonial epistemology aims at elaborating not just another paradigm within the typically modern way of thinking, but a totally new paradigm that shatters such thinking. In other words, decolonial thought is not just concerned about the need for new ideas. Rather, it goes a step further to call for a completely new way of thinking about language, about cultural identities, about regimes of knowledge and knowledge production, and just about everything else we do. Clear? So, a key underpinning concept in decolonial scholarship is that of coloniality, which consists of 4 strands: coloniality of power, coloniality of knowledge, coloniality of being, and coloniality of nature. I am repeating once again: coloniality of power, coloniality of knowledge, coloniality of being, and the coloniality of nature. And now I will elaborate the key contours of all these notions in a brief way that will illuminate our better understanding of diaspora cultures and identity. First is coloniality of power, which theorizes interrelations of practices and legacies of European colonialism in social orders and forms of knowledge. It describes living legacy of colonialism in contemporary societies in the form of social discrimination that outlived formal colonialism and became integrated in succeeding social orders and behaviors. Clear? So, in the explication of the coloniality of power thesis, there is a person called Gross-Fogel, Grossfogel, Gross-Fogel. He begins with a critique. He begins with a critique of how globalization studies, political economy paradigms, and world system analysis have so far marginalized theoretical contributions from global south. Consequently, the academy in the former colonial world has continued to produce knowledge from Western man's point of view, from Western man's point zero God eye view. So this is the very idea as described by Gross-Fogel. He goes on to also suggest that these epistemological paradigms are in need of decolonization everywhere. The locus of enunciation, I mean the point of departure, moves away from the European man to the Latin American indigenous woman or to the American diaspora. For example, you can give several things on these African or American diasporas perspectives. In a critical reflection on the American decolonization project, several critics use the notion of coloniality of power to reveal how African people are today entangled, woven, entrapped in the colonial matrix of power underpinning asymmetrically structured global social order. And they also lament those African scholars who are oblivious to the invisible hierarchies of linguistic, racial arrangements that underpin the imperial global designs within which the struggles for decolonization take place everywhere, not only in Africa, India, Africa, and other places. Yeah. See, now I will tell you the second strand of decolonial thought, the coloniality of knowledge. So the remit of this strand is to problematize Eurocentric knowledge system that see race as grounds for the naturalization of colonial relations between European and the non-Europeans. So from this perspective, the Eurocentric system of knowledge is brought under spotlight for assigning the domain of knowledge production exclusively to Europeans and prioritizing Eurocentric ways of knowledge values and knowledge production. This entails or results in problematizing the West as the logical starting point of valid and relevant theory as a privileged site of knowledge production. So, to speak of coloniality of knowledge is to speak a key aspect of the colonial power matrix and our understanding of the world and our understanding of the world cannot limit itself to encompass only to the Occidental scientific renderings. So, the coloniality of knowledge thesis posits that the Western tradition of knowledge is only valid and useful for some ends. For others, it is unworkable. Therefore, the overall mission of decolonial epistemology is to forge a new and alternative categories of thought, the construction of new subjectivities and the creation of new moods of being and becoming. Clear? Now see. So coloniality of being is the third pillar of decolonial epistemology. So the main punchline of coloniality of being is about how colonialists used Western scientific theories of racism to construct cultural and identity categories that enabled them to doubt the very humanity of the colonized people from global south. Now, several people use several things. They have used the cultural construct of racism, where in India we use different thing in the formation of the coloniality of being. So you have to think over this. Now see, in the words of Maldonado Torres, the concept of coloniality of being enables appreciation of the impact of colonial technologies of subjectivation of the life, body, mind of the colonized people. So thus the coloniality of being speaks to the past and present lived experience of people who were once subjected to colonial domination. So the current global diaspora cultural identities and the ideas about who they are as a people are influenced in many ways by the colonial imaginaries of race and racial categories that were informed by the condescending politics of othering. Clear? As well as the modernist and postmodernist discourses that divided the world into developed, I mean the global north, and developing, I mean the global south societies. So the notion of coloniality, of being seeks to provide counter narratives on identities and the identity formation process by drawing our attention to what Maldonado Torres, M-A-L-D-O-N-D-O, Maldonado Torres, T-O-R-R-E-S, calls for the phenomenology of subjectivity. It allows us to those technologies and mechanisms that produce current understandings of global identity, particularly the bifurcated discourses of them and us, the developed and the developing. Clear? So this pattern is everywhere, all over the world, not only in South Africa, UK, Britain, or else, also in India, till date. Now see. So by drawing on the foregoing insights from decolonial epistemology, it is possible for us to question and challenge the rather simplistic and homogenizing assumptions of multiculturalism and super diversity that do not help us to understand clearly the complex identity formation of the diasporas. Clear? What decolonial epistemology suggests is that there is need for us to push for the recognition of alternative knowledge and alternative ways of conceptualizing cultural identities in order to both counter and complement dominant Euro-American epistemology. Both things, counter and complement dominant Euro-American epistemologies. What we learn from the epistemologies such as decoloniality is that we stand a better chance of coming up with more nuanced understanding and appreciation of the diversity of diaspora identity if we approach them from multi-pronged angles or paths, multi-diversional paths, or the several paths. So the linguistic and cultural identities of diasporas proceeded from a multiplicity of histories and experiences that can only be adequately captured through the development of open-minded and sensitive theoretical frameworks such as decoloniality. Clear? Am I clear? Now see. So the ultimate goal of taking such an approach is to announce the need for scholarship to consider alternative ways of looking at processes by which diasporas construct and renegotiate their identities in the midst of multiple and competing frames that collude and collide in rather unpredictable ways. Clear? So now I'm coming to the summing up session. So the very idea of locality, is significant in this context and has elicited elicit much interest among the scholars working on South Asia and other diasporas in Europe. Clear? The work of James Clifford has suggested that the ethnic ties and fixed boundaries in diaspora consciousness might be replaced by the notions of hybridity through the lived experience of a locality, where less emphasis is placed on home. So instead of being regarded as simply ethnic minorities displaced from their homeland, diasporas might be seen as the product of transnational capitalism, as said by Clifford. So even more relevant is work that has explored significance of location, border, and movement through the idea of diaspora space, in which multiple diasporic groups and those considered to be the indigenous interact. Here, power is seen to work in a multi-axial way or multi-forus, in which minority status is contingent on location. This is not my idea. This is the idea of Akhtar Bra, BRH. So the minority status is contingent on location. Clear? So for South Asians in UK cities, the global and the local are mutually constitutive. Clear? So the local space is also always transformed by which is absent and distant. A sense of this interconnection can be seen in the vernacular descriptions of the South Asian presence, coming from within and across communities themselves. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, sir. Thank you very much, sir.
Right.
A very expressively you have presented your presentation on the decoloniality and literature. The session was very live. I request all participants, if you have any questions regarding this, kindly raise your hands and unmute yourself, and you can ask the questions. Also, you can text in chat box if you have any queries. Dr. Sagarali sir, there are so many great comments here in chat box. You can see here.
Thank you. Thank you.
There is the one comment by Dr. Abrar Ahmed. Today was a day well spent in the company of noble minds and learned souls. All the three sessions were very engrossing and illuminating. Please do keep me in the loop in the future as well. I really look forward to learning from you again. Your discourse was so lucid and insightful. It can be think of health. Thank you, Dr. Abrar Ahmed, for such a great comment. Then we have another comment by Koel Banerjee. He's saying there, I have really enriched through your lecture, sir. Looking for another one in future. And see, thanks. Thank you, Ms. Koel Banerjee. We have another comment, Shudip Das. So do you think coloniality is the tenebrous plexus of modernity? Dr. S.K. Sagarali sir, you have questions by Shudip Das.
Yes.
Asking, do you think coloniality is the tenebrous plexus of modernity?
Of course, there is a darker aspects of modernity, as Minolo has said. So the concept of ontology for the racialized peoples in modernity that shows that they are without ontology, or as Mandolando Torres argues, they exist as non-beings and subhuman others who dwell in the zone of non-being. So on the garb of modernity, there is a place of coloniality in the experiences, in the discussion largely around the racialized experiences and the black and indigenous people. So what Torres says, that the coloniality of being that develops the framework of analyzing the different aspects of the modern perspective under the garb of coloniality. I hope I have cleared your question.
Yes, sir. Thank you, sir. There is one more question for you, sir, by Kumar Das. Question is, what are the significances of studying post-colonial literature as well as diaspora literature in the context socio-cultural and political discourse? I repeat the question, sir.
Yes.
What are the significances of studying post-colonial literature as well as diaspora literature in the context of social, cultural, and political discourse?
Should I answer this?
Yes, sir.
Okay. See, actually, we have seen that the diaspora literature as a reference to the scattering and scattering form of population, and we have seen the sense of exile and homelessness in this diasporic literature, and returning to their homeland is not always a viable option, and hence their literature is marked by exile and homelessness. Diaspora literature is a creative outlet for the displaced mass. That's why in the post-colonial studies, it refers to the dispersion of people from their homelands and displaced people. Not only this, but also the ultimate goal, if I see from this perspective, that is to take an approach that is to announce the need or the urgency to consider alternative ways of thinking or looking at process by which the diaspora construct and renegotiate their identities in the midst of multiple and competing frames and collude the unpredictable waves or ways. Several aspects are there. Thank you. Next question.
Thank you very much, sir. I think there are no... okay, we will take one last question here by Anita Sharma. She is asking you, what is the overall effect of diaspora in the overall sense of belonging or discrimination for those who left their native place in search of livelihood?
I can't hear properly. Can you please repeat?
I repeat again. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. What is the overall effect of diaspora in the overall sense of belonging or discrimination for those who left their native place in search of livelihood?
Yes. See, even more, if we see the relevant work, even more relevant is the demand of the time that the significance of the location, I mean the border and movement through the idea of diaspora space in which multiple diasporic groups they consider themselves to indigenous interact. So the power is seen to the work in a multi-axial way in which the minority status is contingent on location. That is the most important thing. And as we see, the more complex model of the nodalities of power, their operation in specific localities is particularly relevant to South Asian presence in London and in some places. For South Asian settlers in these cities, the global has become the gauge for the outsider at one level, and contingent realities of belonging more than one place at once. Clear? So the life of such people is marred by the identity crisis, and the term for mass migration, particularly in the post-colonial studies, that denotes the dispersion of people, whether voluntary or non-voluntary, and they return to from their homelands. So this is how we can see this perspective. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Now let's move towards the complementary session. Here I would like to call our Honorable Principal, Dr. Sopan Nimbore, sir. Yes, sir. Hello. Thank you, Bankar, sir. Hello. Good afternoon, one and all. This is a great pleasure to conclude this very successful online international conference in English on diaspora literature. First of all, I thankful to Honorable Hambarde, President of Ashti Taluka Shikshan Prasarak Mandal, and all members of the Ashti Taluka Shikshan Prasarak Mandal to give permission to arrange such a international conference on diaspora in English literature. I am pleased to thank Honorable Dr. Ilham Hussain from Dhaka, Bangladesh, Honorable Dr. Ashta Prasad from Binjor, Uttar Pradesh, and Dr. S.K. Sagir Ali from Midnapur, West Bengal. We received overwhelming response from every corner of the country and the world. On the very first day, WhatsApp group of 257 participants was full, and the team in my college made more groups. After registration, total reached more than 832 candidates. We were expecting actual joining of 250, but our shock joining was also crossing the limit of 250. I regret inability to admit more than 250 participants. It is a technical problem. We have planned to share YouTube link to all participants later on. We, the people of science faculty, are not in touch of literature, and that too diaspora English literature, but listening to all resource persons was very interesting. I appreciate the efforts taken by the Department of English and all technical team. I thank all participants, those who could join and those who could not. It was a new experience to organize online international conference. COVID-19 had created many problems all over the world. We are facing the irrecoverable losses in academic field, but it also taught us many new things. I could see my staff emerging with new skills, techniques, and technologies. COVID is a worldwide pandemic. We, the literate people, must take proper precautions
get vaccinated, maintain distance, use mask and exercise to increase our general immunity. With this message to all participants, I conclude. Hope we will get right to the pandemic soon. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. Now, here are some valuable guidelines to you. All the participants who have registered with us will get certificates. As there are 832 registrations, it will take 8 days because one day only 100 certificates are issued online. I request all not to get panic for certificates. We will forward feedback link in the WhatsApp group every day. And after submission of feedback, you will automatically get the certificate. So don't be panic for the certificates. I assure you, everyone will get the certificates. And also, we are going to share the YouTube link. Further, you can watch these all sessions on YouTube. Now here, it's the time of a vote of thanks. I'm going to present vote of thanks here. First of all, I would like to express my sincere gratitude to all the resource persons we had today. Dr. Elham Hussain sir, Dr. Ashta Pratap, and Dr. Sagar Ali sir. Once again, I thank you all. Here, I also thankful to all the participants who have with us. Also, I express my sincere gratitude to very honorable college principal, Dr. Nimbore sir. Also, I express my sincere gratitude to the president of Ashti Taluka Shikshan Prasarak Mandal, Advocate B.D. Hambarde Mahavidyalaya, Ashti. And also, I express my sincere thanks to the coordinator, Nanwate sir. I also express my sincere thanks to Dr. Ravi Sabhay sir.
Excuse me, sir. Hello.
And also, I express my thanks to all my colleagues. Thank you all. With the permission of principal, I here declare this webinar as over.
Excuse me, sir.
Yes,
Could you listen to me, sir?
yes, please.
No. Sir, what about feedback link, please?
Yes, I already intimated that feedback link will be shared in WhatsApp group.
Okay, sir. Thank you.
The online conference is over. Thank you once again.